his attempt to divide our country up based on the color of our skin, based on where we came from, based on our religion, based on our sexual orientation. That the job of a president is in these difficult times is to bring our people together, not to get cheap votes by dividing us up.
What motivates that in him, do you think?
I think it's totally opportunistic politics, and he thinks if he can get one group to hate another group, he can pick up some more votes and win some states.
Bernie Sanders says Trump and Republicans are dividing us. That's right. Democrats aren't divisive at all. They unite people. Conservatives are the ones who divide people. I mean, they say it over and over, so you know it's true.
He sparks a race, does this racial division business, which is what he does quite a bit.
Somewhat racist behavior.
This is beyond racism. This is beyond just weaponizing tweets. This is the work of a serious sociopathic demagogue.
President Trump is once again attacking a leading person of color in Congress, igniting another firestorm and bringing more charges that he's using race to try to divide Americans for political gain.
The left is regularly ranting about Trump's divisive rhetoric and how Trump is trying to divide us. Even Al Sharpton, the race-baiting opportunist, tells us that Trump's commitment is to dividing us.
This is Donald Trump playing the race card, and it is a shame, but he's playing a race-divisive card. He should not continue to try and sell this racist behavior to try and make the country more divided for his own political gain.
However, we're living in a Democrat world of opposites, so nearly everything Democrats say is the complete opposite of reality. It's not conservatives that divide us, but Democrats. Divisive Democrats live and breathe division, because their political front is entirely based on division. Without dividing people, the left has nothing to run on, so division must be manufactured. The left has to polarize people along tribal lines into specific voter blocks to which they can appeal. The feminists, the LGBT lobby, Muslims, black people, Hispanics, the list goes on and on. After all, if you want to centralize power, governing individuals is far too difficult. By appealing to large identity groups, aka identity politics, you can just appeal to an identity group and demagogue people within that identity group into voting the way you want to. But the term identity in identity politics is important because its intention is to foist upon people who fit within a particular category a very specific worldview. If you fit within ABC category, for example, if you're a black person or if you're gay or a woman, you must see the world through this lens, because that's how people who fit your description see the world. And you must see the world this way, or else you're denying your own kind and guilty of betraying your own people. The entire strategy of the Democratic Party is dependent on division, divide into groups, spark outrage, encourage solidarity among the divided groups to simultaneously attack a common enemy. While classical Marxism divided people by class and tried to convince people they're much worse off than they actually are in order to spark outrage and elicit attacks against the oppressive state, cultural Marxism, or identity politics, is much more versatile than that, because it's not limited to just dividing by class. You can divide people by nearly any characteristic, then spoon-feed them the accepted worldview of those who are also forced into the same identity group. Not so coincidentally, no matter what the identity group you're part of, you are a victim of oppression. That's the beauty of identity politics. There are many identities, but all of them are victims. See, the trick is you divide people along these mandatory identities, convince them they're a victim, push that narrative at every turn through Democrat accomplices like the media or the education system or TV, film, music, art, celebrities, and pop culture, or virtue signaling big corporations, and since it's now all around you, you'll believe it because everybody says it. Hell, smarter people than you know it's true, so it must be true. And voila, now Democrats have a nice clean roadmap for what they have to say in order to gain support from each identity group. I can talk about racism and white privilege being everywhere among us, and I'm going to force people to stop all that. Boom, I got the black vote. I can talk about homophobia, and I'm going to fix that. Boom, I got the LGBT lobby. I can talk about debunked gender wage gaps and women being persecuted by a misogynist male-dominated world. Boom, I got women. I can talk about immigration and racism for Hispanics and Islamophobia for Muslims, but since each identity group is a victim, that inevitably means there are victimizers. The oppressed-oppressor paradigm requires a villain. But the good news is the victimizers are always easily identified, and it's those who object to what Democrats want, aka Republicans. It's not that the things we Democrats are saying are lies, and that's why they object to us. It's not that in order to end the victimhood of ABC identity group, we have to take freedoms or money away from others. That's not why Republicans object to what we're saying. It's because they are victimizers and benefit from your victimhood. That's the only reason they object to idiot Democrat talking points. Republicans are racist, and you know it's true because they deny it, and they're anti-black, and just deny oppressing you so they can continue to oppress you. Republicans hate women, and you know it's true because they deny the gender wage gap. stopgap so they can continue to take advantage of you, and they're anti-abortion because they want to control your bodies. Republicans are racist and xenophobic because they think a country should have borders like every other country in the world. Please don't think about it any more than that. It's a simple formula, but it's perfect for Democrats because they can have their cake and eat it too. This is how Democrats can deliberately divide people and then preach the gospel of unity and solidarity. Because when they say these platitudes, they don't mean solidarity between the groups themselves. No. Their own identity groups have conflicting interests at each and every turn. The only thing that really unites them is their common enemy, Republicans. And by preaching the gospel of unity, they enjoin their disparate identity groups to rally together, which is also nice because if you're fighting an enemy who's fighting to keep you chained in your oppressive state, you won't worry so much about the details or think too hard about it. The last thing they want you to do is to reflect on those beliefs because you might come to the realization that their political position is totally incoherent. Like a gay man who's part of the LGBT identity group, whose whole identity and worldview is attached to being attracted to members of the same sex, who comes to the realization that he stands alongside transgenders who argue there is no such thing as male or female. These are just social constructs, thereby undermining the entire purpose of the gay identity group, because being attracted to members of the same sex is irrelevant and inconsequential. So being attracted to another man is no different than a woman because that man could easily become a woman tomorrow if he wanted to. So being gay really isn't a thing because gender is fluid, you see? Such incoherent stances aren't a problem at all. Or if one group realizes their goals conflict with another oppressed group's goals, like feminists with Muslims, or feminists with LGBT people, or LGBT people with Muslims, or LGBT people with religious black people, and so forth, that's not a problem either. That's the beauty of identity politics. Once you divide people, it's hard to leave the group. If members start thinking for themselves and recognize their endless contradictions within their philosophy, just shame them. Identity politics has built-in social policing by shaming dissenters for betraying their own kind and placating to their oppressors. You don't want to be tarred and feathered by your own group, do you? We've got a battle to win. Much easier to ignore the contradictions and go with the group. What's a little cognitive dissonance anyways? Divisive identity politics is great for Democrats, and they know it. Without it, what else would they run on? For years, the left denied having anything to do with identity politics, but today it's become so pervasive. Some of the Democrats today, like Stacey Abrams and Ayanna Pressley, have decided to just go with it openly.
For whatever lived experience and identity that you represent, because we don't need any more brown faces that don't want to be a brown voice. We don't need black faces that don't want to be a black voice. We don't need Muslims that don't want to be a Muslim voice. We don't need queers that don't want to be a queer voice.
Identity politics is exactly who we are, and it's exactly how we won. Identity politics is exactly who we are, and it's exactly how we won.
This is new, because Democrats used to push back on the claim that they're beholden to identity politics, because like all things left-wing, it only works well if you don't know what they're doing. So they've always tried hard to conceal this because the wizard feels much more powerful behind the curtain. And while some still do deny it, or better yet, just accuse Republicans of doing what they're doing, like Bernie Sanders or Don Lemon or Chris Matthews, among many others, who say it's those Republicans who divide people and push identity politics and tribalism.
We're up against tribalism. We're up against people who will lie, steal, and cheat, lie to their own mother, lie to themselves about what's right for this country, about truth, and about facts.
They're saying that President Trump is the one who started tribalism? He's the one?
He is taking us back to where they are, where all the opposition does is say that people who win elections are crooked, that everything's rigged, nothing's on the level, there's no such thing as objective truth. Everything is tribal.
I swear, these people are insane. Right. This is insane. This is insane. They're saying that President Trump is the one who started tribalism? He's the one? Barack Obama said about Trayvon Martin, if I had a son, he would have looked like Trayvon Martin, without even bothering to examine the facts of the case. President Obama went out there in the middle of the Ferguson riots and said that the community of Ferguson wouldn't make something up like Michael Brown, except that it was made up about Michael Brown. It's just... But let's not pretend that the left is not the initiator of it, because the left is the initiator of it, and it's pretty obvious the left has initiated all this sort of stuff.
Everything Bernie Sanders, Don Lemon, and Chris Matthews are saying is the complete opposite of the truth. Democrats divide and push tribalism and identity politics at every turn. They are dependent on the vision. They must polarize people along tribal lines and convince them they're all being oppressed, and use emotionally manipulative tactics to promote crisis and convince voters they're much worse off than they really are in order to spark outrage and call for big daddy government to save the day. All it costs is a little bit of your freedom. But what's freedom worth if you're just going to be oppressed, right? There's no shortage of information or examples of how Democrats divide people for their own personal gain, and there's also no shortage of examples of lefties preaching the gospel of unity while they further divide.
Half of Trump supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables. Racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it.
That's a message of unity? No. It's a message of disunity. It's a message of hate, actually. Think through the implications of it. Racist, sexist, xenophobic. What do you do to people like that? Do you try and help them? Do you feel like they're your countrymen, your brothers? No. Almost everything the left says these days is projection. In almost every single case, they accuse you of exactly what they're doing. And this week was no different. In the wake of 2 horrifying mass shootings, they've been telling us the president is a hater. He's using race to divide us, they scream. It's wrong. Well, they're right about the second part. It's definitely wrong. But using race to divide us, that's a core tenet of the left. Identity politics is the process of dividing people on the basis of immutable characteristics, factors they can't control. And that's what the Democratic Party is at this point. It's an identity politics party.
This very process of constant self-criticism and self-debasement and apology tours and racist, sexist is demoralizing to something called the national spirit. So when you keep doing that to a society, you can't build the Hoover Dam. You can't build you can't go to the moon. You can't win World War II because you don't believe that you're any better than the alternative. And when societies have done that, Rome in the 5th century or Byzantium in the 15th century, then history says if you don't believe you're better than the alternative, what's the purpose? You have no reason to continue as an exceptional country. When Barack Obama said, I think it was a week before the election of 2008, we're this close to fundamentally transforming America, what he meant was economically we'd be a redistributive society. You didn't build that. Now's not the time to profit. At some point you made enough money. And we would be a collection of tribes. So how we looked superficially would be essential to our character. We would be Asian American, we'd be Black American, we'd be gay American, we'd be women, female American, but we wouldn't be American first. And Trump comes along and says, what society has ever succeeded? Austria-Hungary, Rwanda, Iraq, the Balkans, once you promote your tribal interest over that of the Commonwealth. We understand that we've been racist in our past, but we've always overcome that through greater laws, greater sensitivity, intermarriage, assimilation, integration. But if you say that that's cultural appropriation and I'm going to keep my tribe, are you going to hire your tribe for a bureaucratic position?
Jaslow's only sin was having the wrong skin color. On Sunday, 2 congressional Democrats, Vicente Gonzalez and Philemon Vela, demanded that Jaslow be fired from her job and replaced by a person of a different hue. Not a more competent person, they didn't mention that, that's irrelevant. Just a different colored person. That's all that mattered to them. So they forced a person out of her job for having the wrong genes. Apparently, none of this set off any alarm bells over at Democratic Party HQ. Apparently, nobody could think of any other time in history where something like this had happened. It didn't seem ominous to them or creepy or racist. It just seemed like diversity, which we must celebrate because it's our strength.
Even the hoax epidemic we see is orchestrated by Democrats, whether it's Jussie Smollett or fake crimes all over college campuses or racist vandalism on black churches or Democrat politicians like Erica Thomas. They fake these incidents because they need division. They need to rally the troops against the enemy. And if they have to manufacture this division in the form of fake hate crimes, they're perfectly willing to do so, because without people divided in their respective groups, the left doesn't know who to pander to. If you want proof that Democrats are dependent on division, pay very close attention when people start talking about assimilation. You'll notice the left's hysteria chanting, assimilation is racist and white supremacy. They oppose assimilation because they need divided groups. Hispanics that identify more American than they do with their native country are bad for Democrats. They fear that once you'll assimilate, you'll identify as an American and not as a member of a specific identity group. This happened once before, and they don't want it to happen again.
Large body of immigrants looked toward the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party basically said, we're here to subsidize you, and we do not want you to integrate or assimilate or intermarry, because when you do, you follow the paradigm of Italian Americans, who were all Democratic in the 1880s to 1920, and suddenly if your name's Cuomo or Giuliani, we can't predict how you're going to vote. We don't want that. We've flipped California blue, we flip Nevada blue, we flip New Mexico, we want to flip Arizona, we want to flip Texas. We don't want assimilation, so we're going to give you as much amnesty, sanctuary states, sanctuary cities. We'll do whatever it can so you remain tribal in your outlook. Your tribal, racial, and ethnic identity is essential, not irrelevant to your character. The old Martin Luther King idea, the content of our character, not the color of our skin, is irrelevant. If you stop illegal immigration, you're not going to get 400,000 people into the state who look toward the Democratic Party and feel that they are obligated to them through second and third generation. You're going to get the people here who are 40% claim Latino heritage. They're going to follow the 19th and early 20th century Italian paradigm. In other words, their political affinities will be incidental, not essential to who they are. If your name is, I don't know, Robert Wilson and your mother was Hispanic, suddenly you become Roberto Lopez Wilson, hyphenated with 2 accent marks, and that's apparently going to help you career-wise or job-wise or admission-wise. That would all be out the window because it would be intermarriage, integration. Nobody cares whether Rudy Giuliani is Italian. There's no Italian studies program at Fresno State. It just wouldn't happen. And that would happen, and then the Latino 40% of the population would vote on their pocketbook. And they would start asking questions, as many of them already are.
Case in point, Democrats hate assimilation because they need you to be divided. They don't want unity and solidarity among Americans, no matter how many times they say they do. They need Americans to be divided. Democrats relied largely on racial appeals to black voters to mobilize their votes. These appeals highlighted a classic racial nationalist message that pitted blacks and whites against each other, with black people being depicted as enslaved and oppressed victims of white people. The Democrats feared losing the black vote, and the only way they knew how to keep it was doubling down on the racial polarization that had divided the country and hollowed out their political party. Conspiratorial messages of racial victimhood were meant to stem the defection of black voters and increase turnout by spreading racial paranoia and hostility towards white people and Republicans. Racial violence is a deliberate effort to polarize the country by sowing racial hatred. The shooters, whether it's a white man in El Paso or a black man in Dallas, also reinforce the racial nationalism on the other side. They play into the identity politics conviction that beneath the surface a racial civil war is underway. Identity politics was born out of an effort by leftist activists to identify and mobilize potential supporters by breaking down a sense of national solidarity along the lines of group victimhood. Lessons about tolerance, white privilege, and racial consciousness don't end racism, they spread it. Identity politics is the politics of tribalism, and it's only natural for tribes who are taught they are victims of oppression to turn violent.
We're up against tribalism.
His attempt to divide our country up, totally opportunistic politics, and he thinks if he can get one group to hate another group, he can pick up some more votes.